35 years. That is longer than most PGA Tour careers. It is longer than many marriages. When a bond that deep suddenly breaks, it is never about a simple contract dispute. It is about something much heavier, something that made a man finally look away and say, "I can't watch him be treated like this anymore." The golf world is focused on the chaos of the calendar, the signature events, and the money. But they are missing the real story. Right now, a living legend is sitting alone, watching the game he built slowly push him to the side. The whispers from Augusta National, the cold shoulder from the very tour he helped elevate, and the painful unraveling of his own family. This is not just a manager quitting a job. It is a son walking away from his father, and that makes it 1,000 times more devastating. We are going to walk you through the exact moments that led to this breakdown, the specific slights, the shocking betrayals, and the one final event that made Gary Player's own flesh and blood pack up and leave. But we won't give it all away yet, because to understand the ending, you need to understand the weight of the history that came before it, the decisions made behind the ropes, the humiliations that never made the broadcast, and the painful reality of a 90-year-old icon being abandoned by the very institution he built and the family he raised. So, before we dig into the details that the mainstream media is missing, I have to ask for your opinion. Do you believe the modern era of golf has forgotten the legends who built it? Drop your honest take in the comments. And if you actually care about the soul of this sport, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We don't do fluff here. Now, let's get into exactly why this 35-year partnership, this father-son bond, came to such a heartbreaking end. To understand the shock of Marc Player's departure, you first have to understand who he was to his father. Marc wasn't just a hired hand handling travel arrangements and checking sponsor contracts. He was the gatekeeper of Gary Player's entire world for more than 3 decades. He negotiated the appearances, managed the international logistics, and shielded the legend from the endless noise of the business side. But more than that, he was the eldest son, the heir to the empire, the one who was supposed to carry the torch. Think about the trust required for that. Gary Player trusted Marc with his schedule, his reputation, and his legacy. They navigated the rise of the modern tour together. They survived the early live chaos together. They celebrated the ceremonial tee shots and endured the grueling travel schedules. Marc saw his father at his most triumphant and at his most exhausted. And for 35 years, he never wavered. Loyalty that deep doesn't just crack for no reason. It cracks when something fundamentally breaks at the core of everything that bond was built on. That something started to reveal itself not in a single explosion, but in a series of humiliations. The first cut came from the place that should have been Gary Player's sanctuary, Augusta National, the home of the Masters, a tournament Player won 3 times, a place where his name should be spoken with nothing but reverence. But in recent years, the gates have felt less welcoming. Player made a simple request. He wanted to play a casual round with his 3 grandsons, a grandfather wanting to share the magic of Augusta with the next generation. It seems reasonable, right? Almost poetic. But the club refused. They said no. And Player didn't just accept it quietly. He spoke out. He said, "We made Augusta." He said he felt a deep sadness, a disillusionment that cut to his bones. For a man who gave so much to that tournament, to be denied that simple family moment was a slap across the face. Marc watched his father's face fall when that rejection letter arrived. He watched a man who had conquered the world of golf shrink in front of a committee's cold decision. But that was just the warm-up act. The second blow was even more personal, and it struck directly at the Player bloodline. Wayne Player, Marc's brother and Gary's other son, was banned from Augusta National for life. For life. The reason? A marketing stunt during the ceremonial tee shot. Wayne held up a logo on camera. It was a breach of protocol, sure, but a lifetime ban? For a son of a 3-time champion? The message was loud and clear. The gatekeepers of golf's most sacred ground were not just dismissing Gary Player's requests, they were actively punishing his family. Imagine the conversation behind closed doors. Gary advocating for his son, fighting against a decision that branded his own flesh and blood a pariah, and the club standing firm, showing no flexibility, no mercy. That kind of humiliation leaves scars. It doesn't just anger a man, it isolates him. It tells him that his standing, his history, his 9 major championships mean nothing when the committee wants to make an example. Yet, Even with all this, Player continued to show up, continued to smile, continued to be the ambassador the game needed. He swallowed the pain, but Marc saw every bit of it. He saw his father come home, take off the green jacket, and sit in silence. He watched a legend being treated like an inconvenience. That image alone would have been enough for any decent son to start questioning the game's integrity. But the worst was yet to come, and it came from a direction Marc never expected. The final straw, the event that many believe severed the last thread, came from inside the family itself. But here is the twist that the gossip columns got wrong. The legal dispute over the Claret Jug replica was not a betrayal by Marc. It was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Marc had been managing his father's affairs for decades, and in his attempt to protect the estate's finances, he made a move that his father misinterpreted as disloyalty. The media jumped on it. They painted Marc as the villain, the son who would sell his father's trophies for a quick buck. But Gary Player's own words, with great sadness, were not aimed at his son's greed. They were aimed at the situation itself. A father and son, once inseparable, now caught in a legal tangle that neither of them wanted. The lawyers got involved. The press had a field day, and the damage was done. Marc saw his father being torn apart by the very family drama that the golf world loves to feast on. He saw the vultures circling, not just the media, but the power brokers of the PGA Tour, who stayed silent. And where was the tour during all of this? Where was the support structure? Where was the acknowledgement that one of their greatest ambassadors was crumbling under the weight of family destruction and institutional coldness? Nowhere. The tour was busy focusing on the merger negotiations, the Saudi billions, and the million-dollar paydays at signature events. They didn't have time to comfort a legend. They didn't have time to protect his dignity. They had a calendar to fill and purses to inflate. And that, right there, is the moment Marc Player knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He couldn't keep defending a system that viewed his father as a relic rather than a treasure. The walkout didn't happen during a fiery argument. It happened quietly, a realization that crept in over months. Marc looked at the empty seats at his father's table. He looked at the constant rejections from Augusta, the cold silence from the tour's power brokers, and the painful way his brother was banished like a criminal. He realized that every day he stayed, he was complicit in the very system that was breaking his father's spirit. So, he packed his things. He walked away from the 35 years. He walked away from the legacy, the business, and the empire that was supposed to be his inheritance. And when asked why, he said those haunting words, "I can't watch him be treated like this anymore." He didn't specify the exact word at the end of that sentence. He didn't say, "like a villain," or "like a stranger," or "like a fool." He left it hanging. And that silence was more devastating than any specific accusation. It tells the world that the mistreatment is so pervasive, so multifaceted, that it can't be captured in a single adjective. It's the sum of everything. The Augusta slight, Wayne's banishment, the legal tangle that split the family apart, the tour's indifference. A 90-year-old man, who has given more to this game than almost anyone in history, was left to fight alone. And the one person who always had his back, his own son, finally realized that fighting alone was the very thing killing him. So he left. Not because he stopped loving his father, but because he couldn't bear to watch the love be slowly drained away by the very world his father helped create. Now, let's connect this to the broader chaos you see on the PGA Tour every week. This isn't just a sad story about an old man and his estranged son. This is a symptom of a much larger disease. The tour has been so obsessed with competing with the LIV money that it forgot its own soul. It built an ecosystem where the top players chase $20 million purses, where the signature events are the only weeks that matter, and where the traditional tournaments are bleeding star power. We saw it at Colonial. We saw Scheffler, Spieth, and Koepka all withdraw. But that's just the surface. The real damage isn't about missing a few names on a leaderboard. The real damage is the cultural erosion. When you prioritize the young superstars and the new money, you inevitably devalue the old guard. You start treating them as obstacles, not foundations. Gary Player is a living embodiment of that historic foundation, and the way he has been treated sends a terrifying message to every player on tour. It says that your legacy doesn't matter. It says that once your body betrays you and your tee shots don't go as far, you become invisible. And if a legend with 9 majors can be marginalized so ruthlessly by his own son's departure, what hope is there for the journeymen grinding out there week after week, trying to keep their cards? This is the real crisis facing the PGA Tour. It's not just about the Saudis. It's not just about the merger. It's about the erosion of respect for the men who built the infrastructure. Gary Player spent his entire career flying around the world, promoting golf in countries that had never seen a professional tournament. He was the global ambassador long before the tour had a global presence. He shook hands with dictators and presidents, always with the same message of sport and integrity. And how has the institution repaid him? By allowing his family to implode in public, by standing silent while Augusta humiliated him, by treating his 90th year as an annoyance rather than a celebration, and by forcing his own son to walk away because the burden of watching was simply too heavy. Let that sink in for a moment. 90 years old. Most men that age are resting in retirement homes, watching television. Gary Player is still on the range, still hitting balls, still accepting interview requests, still trying to stay relevant to a game that seems determined to forget him. And the one man who was supposed to facilitate that connection, to advocate for him and protect him from the wolves, his own flesh and blood, finally realized that the wolves were too many. The system was too broken. So he walked. A son walked away from his father, not out of anger, out of love. Love so deep that he couldn't stand to see his hero diminished. Now, we have to ask ourselves a hard question. What does the PGA Tour actually owe Gary Player? The answer is simple. They owe him the dignity he has earned. They owe him a seat at the table. They owe him the ability to spend time with his grandchildren at the course he helped make famous. They owe him the respect of not turning his family drama into a public spectacle. But they have failed on all counts. They have been too busy running the circus to care about the lion that carried the show for decades. And that failure is precisely why Marc's departure is such a seismic event. It is the canary in the coal mine. It warns us that the tour's priorities are so grotesquely skewed that they can't even protect their own legacy. As a fan, you probably feel a mix of anger and sadness. Anger at the system, sadness for Player, and maybe a little bit of fear. Because if this is how they treat the legends, what happens to the game's history? Do we just erase it? Do we rewrite the record books to only care about the last 5 years? The answer is no, we don't. But we need to be loud about it. We need to demand better. The tour cannot continue to exist as a faceless corporate machine that chews up its heroes and spits them out. They need to remember that the game is not just about business. It is about history. It is about soul. It is about the moments that transcend the scorecard. And Gary Player gave us a lifetime of those moments. Now, here is the part where I need to be honest with you. Marc Player's departure is a final verdict. It tells us that the situation is irreparable. If the man who spent 35 years navigating his father's career, who shared his blood and his name, believes there is no hope left, we have to trust his judgment. He knows the inside story. He saw the private tears. He heard the desperate phone calls. And he concluded that the treatment of his father was so unjust, so cruel, that he could no longer be a witness to it. He chose to leave the building rather than watch the building collapse on the person he cared about most. That is the deepest level of loyalty you can imagine. He sacrificed his own role, his own income, his own legacy as the heir, because the alternative was too painful. I will leave you with this thought. The next time you watch a PGA Tour broadcast, ask yourself who you are celebrating. Are you cheering for the machine, or are you cheering for the men who built the machine? Drop a comment below with your honest take. Do you think the tour has forgotten its elders? And if you want more raw, unfiltered analysis that cuts through the corporate spin, make sure you've smashed that subscribe button. The story of Gary Player and his son Marc is not a happy one. It is a tragedy. It is a warning. And it is a mirror held up to the face of professional golf, forcing it to see the cracks in its own reflection. Marc walked out because he couldn't watch his father be treated like a stranger in his own house. He walked out because the silence from the powers that be was louder than any applause. He walked out because respect cannot be bought, and when it is missing, there is nothing left worth staying for. We are left with the image of a 90-year-old legend, standing alone on a practice green, surrounded by the ghosts of his own greatness, waiting for a call that will never come. His son's footsteps have faded into the distance. And the game that Player gave so much to is now a colder, emptier place. But the conversation doesn't end here. It starts here, because if enough fans demand respect for the past, the future might just learn to be a little more human. Until next time, keep watching, keep questioning, and never stop caring about the soul of this great game.